Gia is going to lead us in the introduction.
Okay, everyone. So good evening. I'm excited to be here for Governed by Risk. When we talk about technology, most of the focus a lot of times goes to like the tools, the code, and the quick wins. But the truth is, none of that sticks without governance. Governance is the fuel that keeps the engine running. Actually, the work that we do to deliver value for our customers. Also, we want to deliver it in a manner that is safe and secure and also sustainable. And in the landscape that we are in now, risk is everywhere. Governance is that guardrail that lets us move fast without falling off the track. So think about you're driving on a bridge, and if we didn't have the guardrails, we would be chaotic and we'll drive off that bridge, right? So I'll get started with the first question, and anyone feel free to answer it. So when you hear the word governance, what comes to mind first? Paperwork or protection?
When you hear, what does the word governance mean to you?
So when it comes to governance, I feel that protection has got to be the biggest priority, especially when it comes to people's personal data, because we live in an age where it's very easy for people to get access to people's personal data, whether they want to or not. Data brokers, general just breaches in data protection, it's just way too easy. We need those steps to protect that data in question.
Yeah.
Anyone else?
So when I hear the word governance, I think of opportunity, because governance normally comes along with regulation. And so when I think of regulation, I think of opportunities for money making, essentially, for bubbles to be made and for people to sell software to help enable compliance quickly.
Yeah, I like that.
When I think of governance, I think of like data governance, that thing where it's like if you have a file that is not owned by you, but you can use it, it's DRM.
Digital rights management, I guess.
Thank you guys for sharing your thoughts. And by the way, I think it's really not funny, but a little bit ironic that protection and opportunity are mentioned in the same concept. As someone who has ran a club of over 300 people before, I think that governance does have the potential for both protection and opportunities. They both need to be aligned. In other words, regulations. But what it really is, I think, is a culture that people decide to make out of it. So, I mean, I don't know too much about the coding culture, but I know that there are people who hack and there are people who don't hack and think that it's the most horrendous thing in the world. And I think that there's a battle between different cultures for what governance should exactly be like, and it's important for us to consider that from a realistic, personal, person-to-person point of view.
And when we first came up with the idea for this conversation, at least from my perspective, and I cannot stress this enough, there are no wrong answers. When I specifically think of governance, it is really this idea of oversight, the ability to understand and see what's going on, right? See how the sausage is being made. And to your points, all of you, right? There's opportunity there. There's money-making ability there. There's regulatory need that exists within that space, right? All these things have to exist as components of governance, right? It's almost as if these are things that come as a direct result of being able to have that oversight.
Yeah, speaking to your point, Mr. Donnie, our own groups need to govern themselves well as well. One of the when I founded this group a year ago, it's because I had been kicked out of the Code and Coffee group. And the reason was because I'd introduced the Constitution and bylaws. And that had so offended the self-proclaimed executive of Code and Coffee nationwide that he, without following his own articles of understanding, simply revoked my access to the meetup and to the Discord. So the sharing of these permissions, I think, is a very practical need that governance has in our small groups like this.
And, I think it's really important. We really can't have the conversation about governance in a true capacity that we intend to have that conversation without talking about things like accountability, right? And Julian, to your point, I think that's exactly what I hear when I hear you describe your experience. Even separating that specific scenario, just looking at the elements of that experience, right? You have a codified document that states, here's how we expect for people to interact or behave within the space. You have an individual or a group that then looks over that as a steward and to ensure that it is being carried out in the spirit by which it was created, right? Which is effectively what we're talking about from a governance perspective. And then the resulting of that was the accountability or potentially lack thereof within that scenario, right? So I think these are all interconnected concepts, the same way that risk is an interconnected concept within that as well. So I think it's really important as we move forward through our conversation to frame out that understanding of what governance is, like from a very high level, because everything that everyone has shared is absolutely correct. And I think it's going to help to shape how we perceive not only coding and DevOps, cybersecurity, and technology as a whole. Yeah, I've got a quick checklist here of items that I wanted to personally discuss, and one of them was just this, right? It was understanding, how are we thinking about governance? What does this mean to the conversation at a whole? And then the other thing that I think it's really important to discuss is, in a scenario where we find ourselves, and it doesn't matter what industry you work in, it doesn't matter what you do for a living, you could be slinging coffee or slinging code. Like, it doesn't matter. Governance is always going to be a part of everything that we do, because ultimately we're trying to create a product. We're trying to deliver a service to a customer or customers. Ideally, we want it to be something that is sustainable and or repeatable, right? In a scenario where we don't have governance, what does that look like? What are the kind of challenges that we typically find ourselves experiencing when it comes to situations where we don't have governance? And so I'm gonna punt it back to you, Julian, because I really want to get your take on that. Have you ever been in a situation where, for instance, maybe at work, where you're working on a project, maybe in your personal life, where you've been doing something within your area of expertise and you've noticed a significant lack of governance? And what were the outcomes?
I would like to speak on this for a little bit. Marcus, I met at the Tech Unity event this past summer, and Marcus also spoke at DevOps Columbia. So I've got to know a little bit about Marcus's expertise on policy, which, as I said, I think is really important. I have a couple notes here for situations that I've been in a professional environment that could have used a little bit more oversight. For one, protection from insane CEOs and business people. They're a special class of people. Sam Altman, or Bill Gates, or Steve Jobs. These are people who are insane in their own way. And it just comes with their genius, I guess. Are not always hip to cybersecurity. For example, at my last gig, my CEO, he was very, very paranoid, but wound up getting a phishing scam pulled against him.
It's unfortunate.
It's unfortunate. And I wish them the best. When I had set up the GitHub, as a coder, I wanted to make it very permissive. Anybody who comes on as a startup should effectively be, in my view, something like a full stack engineer, should be able to see all the code. CEO at the time kind of reasonably wanted me to restrict it, divide it into front end and back end, which would have me break up the mono repo. See, I didn't really want to do that, but it would have been nice at that time to have a security expert, either to back me up, or otherwise, if they were to decide the other thing, I could say, well, at least I did what I could for the coders. There were a couple other situations where I wish I had a security and policy expert to kind of protect us as the employees, also against snap terminations, which is a very unfortunate and very real part of our industry right now. Is that you wake up one day and you try to log into your computer, and for no reason at all, with no explanation, you can't get in, and then somebody might tell you you're fired. That happened to me at Intel.
And you feel like you're the insider threat, and all
Yes.
you've been doing is trying to protect the company all along.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad energy out there. So I think that's why we need some government. Also, these policy people, they're really good at understanding the business ends and kind of translating between us as coders. I'm representing all the coders tonight. Translating between us and the business interests and kind of keeping us safe from each other. Also cyber attacks, and there's phishing, but also there's this technique called spear phishing, which is where, in addition to, so a phishing scam is when you pretend to be somebody that you're not, like Microsoft. I saw one a meme earlier today that had RN Rosoft. So it looks like Microsoft because it's the R and the N after each other. So
spelling trick.
or Google with the Slavic O.
Yeah, the Cyrillic letters, right?
Yep,
Yeah.
the Cyrillic. And those are phishing attacks. Spear phishing is where they actually study you as a person because they know that you're a high value person, and then target these phishing attacks to you. So it's something that a security advisor should be present to at least try to help ward. And anybody can fall for them. Anybody can fall. I fell for a phishing attack. All right. It was 2.5 years ago. They got my Instagram account. They tried to post some Bitcoin on it. some kind of ad. But I got it back. I was quick. I was savvy with it. I got it back. But phishing can really happen to anybody. And it's good to have a security person there for that. Also, with respect to governance, especially as it relates to cybersecurity, we have two big principles. The separation of duties principle, which is, we know in the US is checks and balances, which keeps one crazy person from making impulsive decisions that wreck your whole company. And you, as the people who aren't going through this, we're not really being berated by marketing the same way that these people are. So we can think a little more clear-headedly. And the US took this approach in separating the executive from the legislative from the judicial. If the separation of duties principle is applied within your company, say it's probably going to be more stable. The last privilege I'd like to introduce is the least privilege principle. We coders hate it. A lot of people like it. It's the least privilege principle. It means that when you're doing, I guess, what Marcus, I still don't really know what you do.
we can get into that.
So what the heck is a VCISO anyway? Let me get through the least privilege principle. AWS is big on this. I'm a AWS certified solutions architect associate. AWS says you should give people within the cloud, you imagine these big IAM systems, right? Marcus knows all about them. You make all these roles. I don't get it yet either. Roles, the users have the roles, but the roles also have the attributes. You don't want to give people access that they don't need. Right. And that's kind of a liability thing that I'm sure Marcus could tell us about.
Yeah. So you make a lot of really good points, and I'm going to bring it back to the core of what we started off this little bit of a conversation about. And we're talking about what happens in a scenario where you don't have governance, where you don't have the oversight. And everything that you're mentioning really aligns with that very, very well. And to kind of even segue off of that a little bit while still staying on point, you mentioned it. That's my area of expertise. I'm an identity security professional. I kind of don't like to use the word expert. It's a personal pet peeve of mine, but I am a professional in that space. The things that you're talking about, right? You're talking about separation of duties. You're talking about the principles of least privilege. You're talking about role-based access and defining a role and giving it the access based off the attributes, et cetera, et cetera. We can have a whole conversation about that by itself, but to just keep it simple for right now, one of the things I will say is that even from a more practical standpoint, like if we just completely erase any of the technical jargon that typically comes along with the work that I do specifically, it's about objectivity. Keeping it simple, it's about objectivity. If I'm the person that you're hiring to build the safe for your bank, you don't also want me to be the person who sets the combination for the safe of your bank. And to be honest with you, I don't want to be that person either for a number of different reasons. Number one that comes directly to the front of my mind is in a scenario where there is a lack of governance and something does happen, I don't want to be on the top list of suspects. Exactly. I don't even want to be considered as a person who could potentially have just the right level of what we call toxic access traits, right? That would allow me to be able to both have the means and what is it, the opportunity or the desire even, right, to take those kinds of actions. And so that's one of the things that we really want to be mindful of when it comes to understanding the framework of governance and how it actually applies from a more practical standpoint within any spaces that we work in. Because these are not just protections for the business. They're protections for each and every one of us who has to operate within the parameters of said business. Yeah.
VCISO, Virtual Chief Information Security Officer.
Uh-huh. That is a thing. It is a real thing. I promise it's not like Santa Claus. It does exist.
Kind of like a fractional CTO or a fractional CSO.
Correct. There are some organizations, and I'm sure we're all familiar with this business model. Sometimes organizations exist in a space where they may be growing or they may reach the element of growth where they're not really interested in growing any larger than they are. And so they can't, or they don't want to justify, there's a need for them to not have a full-time CISO on staff. However, they still recognize the requirement and the need to be protected in a way that a CISO can offer protection. And that's a lot of times where you'll see a vCISO kind of showing up and providing those specific services.